Player One is the latest film from director Steven Spielberg and is also based off of the book written by Ernest Cline, who also had a hand in the screenplay of this film. And this, of course, takes place in a future that kind of sucks. Everything's kind of boring and dry. The color palette is all muted. There are certain places in the world where people just live in trailer parks stacked on top of each other. So everyone is kind of living a bad life in reality. Fortunately for them, there is a virtual reality game called the Oasis that they can go into and basically do whatever they want, play games or just live their life, do whatever. And the creator, James Halliday, unfortunately passes away, but he leaves an announcement saying that he left an Easter egg that is so hard to find that if some person is lucky enough to find it, the Oasis will now be owned entirely. And that is the goal of our main character, Wade Watts, played by Ty Sheridan, and his team, the High Five. And they want to get this Easter egg before the evil corporation IOI, who is trying to corporatize the Oasis, gets to it first. I am a big fan of the book. As you can see, I got it through a loot crate and it was so amazing. In fact, I was halfway through reading the book when the news kind of broke, like, hey, Spielberg's gonna be directing the Ready Player One movie, and I was like, oh my god, what a coincidence. So I've been pretty hyped for this movie for quite some time now, especially when they announced the cast and when they announced that Ernest Cline was gonna have a hand in the screenplay with Zach Penn. I was obviously very excited for that because if anyone knows the Ready Player One world, it's Ernest Cline and Steven Spielberg, because it has like Steven Spielberg written all over it if you haven't read the book. And this film so far is the most fun I've had in a theater for quite some time. On a technical scale, this is kind of a masterpiece. Spielberg once again proves to us why he's such a genius at not just blockbuster filmmaking, but filmmaking in general. There's so many magical moments in this film, especially when they go into the Oasis, where the color palette's all bright and the Oasis just visually is so amazing. The character designs, characters that you know and characters made up for the film, they look so appealing and so well designed in this film that it's easy to get attached visually to what you're seeing on screen, especially when it gets involved in the action sequences. There's a car chase near the beginning of the film that is amazing. It's a lot of chaos in that car chase, don't get me wrong, but you're still able to focus on every little thing that's in there. And speaking of little things in there, there's so many Easter eggs in this film. You can basically play Where's Waldo with this movie if you really wanted to. It would be very hard. You need to see this film like multiple times if you want to like understand everything that you're seeing, but there's enough in there that you can see on first glance that might be able to draw you back and be like, who else can I find this time? Especially when you get into those major action sequences where it's just lines of people coming at each other and everything just visually looks very polished and well done. And what I love about the Easter eggs is that the movie never stops to show you like, hey, look at this. Get it? We're clever by showing you this. They do have moments where they have to show you something that is relating to pop culture, but instead of just stopping everything, halting it just to have it, it's just there with the story, and the story is just continuing on, and it just showed you that because it's important for the story, it's important for the situation, and that's the way you use pop cultural references. If it works for the story and if it works for the scene that it's in, and it doesn't halt everything. Besides the visual appeal of this film, another thing that really engrosses you into each scene is the musical score by Alan Silvestri, which is apparently the first time that Spielberg and Silvestri have worked together on a film, and I'm happy that they teamed up for this film because Silvestri was able to create such a fantastic score. It fits well enough for the story's tone while having enough of that fantasy, whimsy kind of sound to it. It's just a gorgeous score all around, and it's a much better score than what's been out in a lot of recent Spielberg films. Not a diss to John Williams or anything, but it's just that when you listen to the score in Ready Player One, it's pretty much transportive in a way. It gets you into the movie even more. There are so many incredible things about Ready Player One. My favorite thing, I can't spoil it, but let's just say they go into a virtualized movie, and I'll leave it at that. Brilliant. Spielberg, mwah, that was genius. And it's also a change from the book. It was something that wasn't in Ernest Cline's novel, and I am perfectly fine with films changing the source material in order to best fit the movie format, because everyone knows movies and books aren't the same medium, so if you have to make changes, it's appropriate. And there are also other changes besides the one I just mentioned that I really loved, like the car chase from earlier, not in the book, but they added it, and I loved it. Also, the character of I Rock, played by T.J. Miller in this film, loved him. He was such a minor character in the book that I was surprised that they were making like such a big deal out of him when they announced that TJ Miller was cast, but I completely understand it now because I-Rock as a character is so well realized in this film. Love him even more than when I read him in the book. However, even though I love this film on a technical scale, Spielberg's direction, editing, cinematography, musical score, visual effects, action sequences, all these nerdy scenes in this film, seeing all these nerdy characters show up, it's all wonderful, and it's all wonderfully realized, but there are certain flaws in this film that I have to be objective about. Like, I want to nerd out about this movie, but I can't just do that because then I'm being a blind, biased reviewer, and I don't want to do that for you because that's being dishonest. Objectively, there are flaws with this film that I had. Maybe others didn't have them, but that's fine. It may also sound like that I'm being a book purist, like, oh, the book is way better, why'd they make a movie? That's not it. Already explained that earlier. It's just that there are certain things that this movie does kind of wrong, and the closest example of how they could have done it right is only the novel. So in the next portion of this review, there will be certain times where I bring up the book. It's not to diss this film just because I love the book way too much. It's just there are flaws with this film that I think could have been improved, and some examples of that are in the source material. And pretty much my main issue with this film is slightly a positive too. It kind of adds to the entertainment factor, and that is the rushed kind of pace of this movie. Now, it does go by quickly. 2 hours and 20 minutes honestly doesn't feel like that at all with this film, and I was surprised when the movie was starting to kind of wrap up. I was like, that was 2 hours and 20 minutes? Wow. And that's good because that easily adds a lot of excitement and energy to a lot of these sequences. It adds to a lot of the entertainment that I had with this film. Unfortunately, that kind of ruins some moments with the characters. When watching this film, I didn't really feel like they delved into some of these characters enough. Now, their personalities, excellent. Very well handled. Especially that contrast of when they're in the Oasis and they have more confidence, but then they get into real life, and they're sort of the same, but there's some differences too. I love all of that. And our lead character, Wade Watts, played by Ty Sheridan, I think Ty did a very good job with this character. It's just more so his home life, I think, should have been explored a little bit more. There's one scene, pretty much, where they go over it, and then after that, it's just kind of a nothing thing. And it was just like, okay, I get the surface level of what's going on, but I feel like you should have really impacted us with how miserable his life kind of is. Also, the character of H. I think certain marketing things have spoiled this kind of surprise, but I won't for you guys. There's a twist in the book about this character. It's a surprise where when I read it in the book, I was like, whoa, no way. But in the movie, it just kind of went by a little too quickly, and they also didn't really focus on it enough. And I'm not saying that this certain surprise should be focused on like forever and ever or anything like that. It's just that I feel like a little bit of focus should be on that because it is kind of a drastic change from what we're used to. And instead they're kind of like, oh yeah, a surprise about me. Alright, let's move on. The characters of Daito and Sho in this movie felt a little bit more like background characters where, comparing to the book, their characters actually felt like they had more of a presence. But in this film, they're fun. Like, you watch them and they're fun on screen, but they don't really have that same impact. And I also didn't really get a sense of why the two characters are even friends with H and Wade and Artemis, because they just feel kind of there, and they're fun, but maybe you should have added a little bit more to that like you did in the book. Like, something happens too with them that like completely impacts it. It's like a big moment, and that's like completely cut from this film. Artemis, I think, is the most well-realized character. Olivia Cooke did an excellent job playing her, in fact. She's got a great personality. They covered that backstory with her that kind of fuels her motivations. However, when it comes to the romance of this film, it's not as strong as I was really expecting it to be, because they start off the beginning of the movie very similarly to the book, where it's like, alright, you're introducing that theme that was kind of important to like the very end of this film when it comes to them. Alright, I'm digging it. But then they reshuffle a few things from the book's plot that makes it so that it happens earlier in this film, and when that happens, all of a sudden their relationship is just kind of like nothing else really develops from that, and all of a sudden this theme that they had set up well in the book and also in this movie just kind of fizzles out and is not really as prominent anymore, and it doesn't really have the same impact as it did in the book. As I said earlier, I'm a fan of movies changing the source material if it best fits the screen, but in this film, their romance goes from very well organized, very promising to, now they're just kind of the same, like they're not going to develop anymore. And Ty Sheridan and Olivia Cooke, they have good chemistry with each other, they're sweet together, but their relationship in the book was just very complex and very interesting, and in this movie, it starts off that way and then just it's just kind of nothing. It's just a thing, and that's it. Nothing else comes of it. So our lead characters, the High Five crew, although their personalities are a lot of fun, and the performances are definitely not bad, like, don't get me wrong, they're very well directed by Spielberg, and he knew exactly what performances to get from them, but as far as the writing goes, I feel like their backstories could have been fleshed out a little bit more, feel like you're actually experiencing the Oasis with them, like you could walk up and walk next to these guys, instead of feeling like you're the guy in the crowd who's like 5 people behind the lead character, and you somewhat know him, but not a lot. If that analogy makes any sense. However, there are characters that I thought were very well done in this movie. I already mentioned I-Rock earlier. I'm gonna mention James Halliday now, played by Mark Rylance, who is very good here. Through his voice, he was just able to convey something that I was able to relate to. Like, I'm watching his performance on screen as Halliday, and I'm like, you know, there's certain things about him that kind of remind me of me, and it kind of tugged at my heartstrings a little bit. Like, they really did a very good job with the character of Halliday, especially with how the challenges represent something in his life, and that's how they kind of flesh him out even more. Like, big fan of how they did that in this film. Also, Nolan Sorrento, played by Ben Mendelsohn. His character is pretty much just the epitome of corporate douchebag. So some people may complain like, oh, what else is there to his character? He's just a corporate guy. Like, that, I kind of just see that as the point. He just represents, like, all of these big corporations that are trying to incorporate the Oasis, so I'm fine with that. His performance, however, elevates Nolan Sorrento's character much more, so I was a big fan of that, seeing him on screen. So did I have fun with Ready Player One? Abso-frickin-lutely, dude. I stand by what I said earlier. This is some of the most fun I've had with a film recently. There's so much to love about this film that no matter what I say flaw-wise about the characters, about certain things, the plot is structured, and how kind of rushed everything kind of feels, it did not really deter my enjoyment of the film, like, at all. There's so much to appreciate about this movie. I'm gonna give Ready Player One a B. Visually, it's a masterpiece. The action sequences are so much fun. The characters are fun with each other. I think they could have been fleshed out a little bit more, though. I think the pacing could have been a little bit better, and maybe the plot structure could have been fixed so that the second and third act don't really feel as jumbled and not as well done as the first act. Also, there's some like unnecessary exposition in the first act that doesn't really need to be there. There's some that does, but then some that could have just been removed and we could have seen it visually. But like I said, it does not ruin my enjoyment of this film. The score, the directing, cinematography, everything technical about this film is just so well done that how can I not recommend it to anyone? Like, this movie is a visual, technical marvel. But if you've seen Ready Player One, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.